Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for an event. His event and making it virtual, something that we have done with a few other events on campus here, and really helping make this possible. So I wanted to thank Drew for letting us help make that possible. I will not be giving the introduction of Professor Fight. I'm going to have our program coordinator, Derek Parker, who served as an AmeriCorps member for the Digital History Lab prior to joining the Hub. Before we get into that, I'm going to go over a couple of logistical odds and ends for the event platform. Most people that attend our events have not had the opportunity to use AirMeet before, so we're just going to run through a quick couple things here. The first thing you'll notice on the right-hand side, if you look at the chat button, you should see that Derek Parker has posted a couple times in the chat here, telling everyone to grab a virtual table and get ready for the event. So what I'm going to ask is if everyone will type in the chat, tell us the last virtual event that you attended. Let's see and make sure that everyone sees how to use the platform. If you're on mobile, you might not be able to, but if you're on a computer, you should be able to post there in the chat. So go ahead and let's see if everyone can do that. Awesome. Yep, there we go. Okay, looks like everyone has the hang of that. The second thing I want to draw your attention to is the question feature. So right underneath the chat button is a question feature, and you'll see that Derek has already posted a sample question there. And this is where we will look for questions at the Q&A portion of the event for Professor Fight to answer. And make sure to upvote questions that you want to hear answered. The third and final thing I want to mention is at the bottom of your screen, you should see a smiley face, a reaction button. So if you click on that button, you'll be able to react in real time to what we are saying. So if everyone will go ahead and let us know how you're feeling about this event, whatever emoji best fits your feeling right now. Good, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up and smiles. A few light bulbs, I like that. Okay. All right, so I believe that is the end of my spiel here. So I'm going to take myself off stage and hand it over to Derek to introduce Professor Fight. Thank you all.
Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Parker. A lot of you may know me. Some of you may not. I am the program coordinator here at the Cricker Innovation Hub, and it's my great honor to introduce Dr. Andrew Fight. So Dr. Fight is a native of Georgia. He graduated from Furman University in South Carolina before completing his PhD at the University of Kentucky. And despite not being from here, we will not hold that against him. Drew is a great historian. He came here in the early 2000s to teach at Shawnee State University. And he really became he became immersed in the history and lore here. Drew loves to say that whatever you're looking for in regard to history, whether it's the history of slavery and the Underground Railroad, or labor history, or the civil rights era, that can all be found right here in Portsmouth and Scioto County. So to that end, he launched not only the SSU Digital History Lab, but the Scioto Historical app in 2013. The app's awesome. I think if you Google it or check out on the App Store, you'll love it as soon as you pick it up. It's an educational mobile app that really puts the history of our area at your fingertips, and it's done with stories and maps and photographs and a lot more. I'm sure Drew can describe it way better than I can. But I was lucky enough to work on that app in the Digital History Lab for 2 years as an AmeriCorps member through the Ohio History Service Corps. And so that's just another thing that he's kind of spearheaded, is that program is in its 4th year now. And myself and other members have been allowed to explore and uncover kind of lost history in our area, which has just been awesome. So I guess what I'm rambling on about and what I'm trying to say is that Drew cares about this area quite a bit. The history, he cares about the civil rights history here from past and present. I want to really thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It's going to be a good event. And without further ado, I present Dr. Andrew Fite.
Thanks so much for that very kind introduction, Derek. And thank you, David, for hosting this on the Curricular Innovation Hub's platform with AirMeet. So this program is brought to us by the Digital History Lab at Shawnee State. This is part of our Black History Month programming. With COVID, we're taking it virtual and online rather than having our usual expo that we've put on with the 14th Street Community Center here in Portsmouth. So what I'm going to do today is share the screen from my phone, which will allow me to share the Scioto Historical app interface. But I'm also going to be switching back and forth to a PowerPoint presentation with various images and other information. So, hang with me, and I appreciate your patience, but I'm going to be flipping back and forth between those two screens. And then also back to the camera to talk with you like this. So let me just start with my PowerPoint presentation, and we'll roll from there. All right. So again, this is sponsored by the Curricular Innovation Hub, the Digital History Lab. It's also being sponsored by the Teaching and Learning Center at Shawnee State. It's part of this year's Festival of Faculty Achievement. So I want to thank my fellow faculty members that have joined us for this program. Also, I want to thank my students as well as other community members for coming out. But it looks like we got people from all over the region and the U.S. So thanks for joining us. The webinar and this virtual field trip is made possible in part through the support of the Ohio History Service Corps. It's an AmeriCorps program that Derek mentioned. The Shawnee State University Development Foundation, the Scioto Foundation, the Digital History Lab, the Department of Social Sciences, the College of Arts and Sciences, and the Office of the Provost at Shawnee State University. Also, special thanks again to the Curricular Innovation Hub. So what we're going to be doing today is demoing the Scioto Historical app and website. Also previewing, you could say, some of the new content that we're working on that will ultimately be published and introduced in version 4.0 that we're currently developing. Hopefully with the launch of version 4.0 in the summer of 2022. So if you want to, you can check out the website, sciotohistorical.org. You can also go to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store for your Android phones, and you can download the app for your smartphone. So here's a nice little photo of the Clark Memorial Library. That's where the Digital History Lab is located. And here are a couple of students from Shawnee working in the lab, processing some collections. So I wanted to start the presentation with the story of a newspaper collection that Shawnee State recently acquired, a donation from the Portsmouth Daily Times. And they donated the a collection of newspapers, their old morgue, as it's sometimes called, which included not only the Daily Times, but also some good long runs of other papers that were published in Portsmouth. And among those is the Daily Evening Tribune. And my students and I have been working on conserving these papers and preparing them for digitization, thanks to a grant. But while my students were working on this, I encouraged them to, well, I say encourage, there was an assignment involved, but they were supposed to, as they went through the papers and inventorying them, they were to look for any articles that they might see dealing with slavery. And the papers that we were processing, again, were from the 1850s. And so one of my students found this runaway slave advertisement. And you can see here, ran away from the subscriber on the Tuesday before New Year, December the 27th, 1853. A black woman named Harriet, age about 19 years. She's about 5 feet 8 inches high, tolerable dark, speaks pretty quick, and is quite smart and talkative. The above reward, $100, will be given for the return of said girl, or a liberal reward for information that may lead to her recovery. Signed, Hannah Warner, Greenup County, Kentucky. So Portsmouth, Ohio, is located on the Ohio River, due south from Columbus. We're upriver from Cincinnati. We're downriver from Ashland, Kentucky, Huntington, West Virginia. And as a free state and as a border state, Ohio and the area that we're talking about here, Southern Ohio, in this border region, had a very active Underground Railroad. Slavery was very much a presence. Even though slavery was outlawed in Ohio, the institution of slavery certainly still crossed over the river into Portsmouth, both as a result of the interstate slave trade, where slaves were brought down the Ohio River and sometimes stopped off in Portsmouth, but also because of runaway slaves who crossed the Ohio River seeking freedom here in Scioto County. Now, the initial slide that we had this depiction of the runaway slave, this iconic male runaway slave. And American newspapers, ran advertisements for runaway slaves, and they developed this iconic image. Now, the one we're looking at here was printed in July of 1837. It was actually printed by an anti-slavery newspaper magazine called the Anti-Slavery Record. And going back to the slide here of the advertisement published in Portsmouth, you can see that the printer here used a male figure because it was much more common for runaway slaves to be men. So there wasn't actually, the local paper did not have a symbol, piece of type to illustrate a female runaway slave. So what we know about Harriet is that she was given a special pass to cross over to Portsmouth during the holidays, the winter holidays, which was not uncommon, and she never returned. And so one thing we see is that Portsmouth was a place where slaves disappeared on the Underground Railroad. And part of that, a key part of that, was the free black population, the free black community that had developed in Portsmouth. So in 1834, this is just one example of how slavery would come ashore in Portsmouth. But in 1834, in this report, a flatboat landed here carrying a slave coffle, which is a group of bound men and women, and they were being driven to market. And in this case, they were actually being floated downriver. The coffle snake whip. The leading white man said, "If I catch any of you free Negroes talking to my gang, I will put a load of buckshot into your black hides." Nelson Evans assured his readers that such scenes occurred frequently here in Portsmouth. Portsmouth is famous today for its floodwall murals by Robert Dafford. And if you go looking for the Underground Railroad mural, it might escape your notice. It's located on the mural that is dedicated to Battery L, a company from Portsmouth that fought in the Gettysburg Battle during the Civil War. But if you look down here at the bottom, there's a panel which depicts the Underground Railroad. This is on the left side. It's the North Shore of Ohio, and you can see slaves, runaway slaves, getting out of a boat with some white, one holding a gun in the background, and the other on the left, looking across the river. On the Kentucky side, or the South Shore of the river, you can see another group of slaves escaping, and another white man there helping with the escape. I'm going to go back here for a second. So the crossing at Portsmouth, this is the name of the mural by Robert Dafford, and it captures, of course, the drama and the romanticism of the Underground Railroad, but it also does seem to omit the key role that African Americans played themselves as conductors of runaway slaves. And ultimately, what we're going to see is that the network here in Portsmouth was a biracial network of whites as well as blacks, operating independently at times and at other times cooperating together. So what I'm going to do now is switch back to, or switch to my app, the Scioto Historical app. So let me pause that and then pull up the application. Let's see. There we go. So here's the homepage on my phone, and here's the Scioto Historical app opening here. And this is the landing page when you're first opening. Right now it's highlighting the story of James Ashley and the 13th Amendment. I'll get to that in just a few, but I'm going to go down here and interact with this through the maps, and zoom out just to show folks, each one of these red pins is a story. These stories are not all about the Underground Railroad or African American history, but many of them do deal with African American history and the Underground Railroad. So I'm just going to zoom in here, and we'll see where there's Shawnee State University. Over here is the Cricker Hub. But this is the map interface for the app. Let me go over here to the tours. I'm going to pull up the Abolitionists and the Underground Railroad. So we currently have a tour. This is the introduction to the tour. I have set things up for today so that only the places that we're going to be visiting are currently on here. And again, this is a lot of this content is under development. And so I've only basically just created an entry so that there are those little historical pins that actually I want to interact with it graphically with the map interface to show you where we're talking about. So there's Portsmouth. If you zoom out, you can see South Shore, Kentucky. Over here, we're going to zoom into what's Greenup. This is the town of Greenup, the county seat of Greenup County. And right here on the Ohio River, just across from Ohio, is the historical pin that we have for what's known as the Greenup Slave Revolt. So back in 1829, there was a small slave revolt, you could say, that's connected to the interstate slave trade. So I'm going to, let's see. Here is a newspaper article that some of the information, here we are. So the image that we're looking at here would be a slave coffle, part of the interstate slave trade. You have the slavers driving the men and women that are chained, handcuffed, and so forth. And it wasn't uncommon for them to have some of the slaves who had musical talents to to play music and sing as they marched them west to be sold into the slave markets of Mississippi, Texas, and so forth, into Louisiana. So the story of the Greenup Slave Revolt does appear ultimately in David Walker's famous appeal. So this initial report, though, appeared in a Portsmouth paper called the Western Times, and it was edited by a man named Julius Bingham. Bingham, we now know, was an abolitionist and did also help out with fugitive slaves. Bingham's account of the revolt, though, went viral, and it ended up being read in Boston, Massachusetts by the Black abolitionist David Walker. And Walker would include Bingham's account in his pamphlet. Walker's appeal, if you're not familiar with it, first appeared in 1829, just months after the events in Greenup. And it's been described as one of the most important social and political documents of the 19th century. So you can see here from the appeal that the story was Dateline, Portsmouth, Ohio, August 22nd, 1829. A most shocking outrage was committed in Kentucky about 8 miles from this place on the 14th instant. So on the 14th of August, a Negro driver by the name of Gordon, who had purchased in Maryland about 60 Negroes, was taking them, assisted by an associate named Allen, and the wagoner who conveyed the baggage to the Mississippi. The men were handcuffed and chained together. So basically what happened, and there's a summary here, is that some of the slaves were able to get a file and were able to remove their shackles. They then acted like they were fighting each other, and so that the slave traders that were transporting them stopped and came to try to break up the fight. They then turned on those men and attacked them. Ultimately, they were able to largely get away after they killed 2 of them. This is how David Walker described it. Here, a notorious wretch with 2 other Confederates had 60 of them in a gang, driving them like brutes, the men all in chains and handcuffs, and by the help of God, they got their chains and handcuffs thrown off, and caught 2 of the wretches and put them to death and beat the other until they thought he was dead and left him for dead. However, he deceived them, and rising from the ground, he made his escape. And David Walker then asked, should the lives of such creatures be spared? Are God and Mammon in league? What has the Lord to do with a gang of desperate wretches who go sneaking about the country south? Shipments of copies of it were sent there, and ultimately it led to a number of arrests of African Americans and others for possessing this abolitionist literature. Now, David Walker was unaware, or at least he published his appeal before the results of the hunt for the rebels was completed, and then ultimately a trial and execution. But thanks to the reporting of Julius Bingham, we do have an account of that dramatic, heartbreaking execution. So when the fateful hour arrived and a large crowd had gathered in Greenup, all 4 of the condemned men, and these are the words of Bingham, maintained to the last the utmost firmness and resignation to their fate. They severally addressed the assembled multitude, in which they attempted to justify the deed they had committed, on the principle implanted in the breast of every man by nature, to fight for freedom of that failure with their lives. They were willing to do so, reported Bingham. These heroic men, bound and standing before a crowd of angry white Americans, asserted that, quote, They had done no more than their judges and executioners would have done under similar circumstances, and that too with a solemn appeal to the judge of heaven and earth for the integrity of their motives and the justice of their cause. Julius Bingham then concluded his reportage by noting that one of the men, while standing upon the cart, just ready to be launched into eternity, exclaimed several times, "Death, death, any time in preference to slavery." All right. I'm going to stop sharing that for a second and pull up my slides. So give me a second. Let's see. All right. So one of the stories that we're working on right now involves a farm that was owned by Moses McCoy in Greenup County, and the records I've been able to find so far indicate that his farm was near the mouth of the Little Sandy, and that's the river that runs right through the town of Greenup into the Ohio River there. So the location of the execution of the rebel slaves is most likely not very far from Moses McCoy's farm. And the reason why we're interested in Moses McCoy's farm is because Moses McCoy was a slave owner, and one of his slaves named Isaac, we now know was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. He was a cooperator, in the words of the records, that Isaac, and we don't know his last name, unfortunately. It could be McCoy. He might have adopted his former owner's name, but we really don't know. But Isaac, described as a pious old Negro, according to the records, stayed a slave himself, but he assisted other slaves in their escape. And we know this information thanks to Wilbur Siebert, professor of history at Ohio State, who is best remembered as the author of The Underground Railroad from Slavery to Freedom, published in 1898, which is the first systematic study of the Underground Railroad. Siebert's research included an interview that provided that information, an interview with a man named James Ashley, a congressman from Portsmouth, who provided this information. But I do want to stop for a second and read this passage from David Blight's article called "Why the Underground Railroad and Why Now? A Long View." Professor Blight teaches at Yale. His most recent work, I highly recommend it. It's a biography of Frederick Douglass. So you might check that out. But what Blight had to say about Siebert was that he had a huge impact on both the study of the Underground Railroad, but also myth, legend, and so forth associated with the railroad. A romantic take, to some degree, you might say, on the Underground Railroad. So this is what Blight said: "Like the real railroads in the mid-19th century, which created and sustained the economies of many a new town, old communities in the 20th and early 21st centuries, like Portsmouth, have needed to find their own connection to Siebert's vast network of depots as they seek historical prestige and ply the market for nostalgia about how America overcame slavery. No one did more to expand the geographic imagination for the Underground Railroad than Siebert." Now, the story is that Siebert was visiting the Columbian exhibition in Chicago in 1893 when he saw this painting by Charles T. Weber entitled "The Underground Railroad." This is a classic painting from the late 19th century, capturing really the romance of the Underground Railroad. And it's also one that highlights the white role, or the role of white abolitionists in the Underground Railroad. So the depiction here is one where the operators of the Underground Railroad are white, and that they're the ones helping the poor and somewhat helpless African Americans escape from slavery. You have Levi Coffin depicted here along with his wife, prominent abolitionists and Underground Railroad operators in Cincinnati. But this is definitely a painting that sort of depicts the Underground Railroad as one of white operators helping African Americans. And as we'll see, that's really a distortion, that it really was a biracial system, network, and that it was primarily, I would argue, African Americans that were running the Underground Railroad. Siebert is known for the maps that he created based upon his research, and these maps have been reproduced hundreds of times. And they are, sort of leaves you with the impression that this is exactly what the railroad network looked like. And it can be misleading. Not to say that these are wrong, but there are many paths that slaves took that are not on this map. But if you look down where Portsmouth is located, Siebert has two lines basically running up through Scioto County. And with my research, I believe there actually were probably three primary lines. One that ran up through Sciotoville to Oak Hill, which you don't necessarily see here. I think he might have gotten this map a little wrong. The other one ran up from Portsmouth itself up the Chillicothe Road to the Scioto Trail. And then there was a line on the west side of the Scioto River that probably followed along. I think the way that Siebert has it is that he has it following along the Ohio Erie Canal, which went from Cleveland all the way to Portsmouth. And the research that I've done suggests that there was actually a third line or another line that ran perhaps through Friendship, but at least another west side line. And whether they went up the canal route is not really clear at this time. So in July of 1894, Siebert interviewed James Ashley about his involvement in the Underground Railroad here in Scioto County. And Ashley revealed the names of several cooperators, white and black, including a slave from Greenup County, Kentucky, named Isaac. And it was Isaac who helped Ashley ferry the fugitives across the Ohio River. So here's a photograph of James Ashley when he was serving in Congress during the Civil War, a photographic portrait that was done by Matthew Brady, the famous photographer. So Ashley told Professor Siebert that with Isaac's assistance, he led 7 runaways from Greenup down the Ohio River, past Portsmouth and the mouth of the Scioto to an Underground Railroad station in Nile Township. Okay, so let's go back to the app. And I'm going to go back to the tour map. Remember, we were down here at Greenup, and you can see that river or the creek going in there. That's the Little Sandy. And Moses McCoy's farm would have been probably in those bottoms down there by Greenup or in that area. And that's where Isaac and James Ashley began the crossing of the Ohio River. So what they did is they would go downriver and follow the river down here past Wheelersburg and Sciotoville and what's now New Boston, and past Portsmouth and past the mouth of the Scioto River all the way down here. Now you're passing Raven Rock and And here's Friendship. So Friendship. The village of Friendship was settled by a number of Quakers. And we all know that the Quakers had anti-slavery beliefs. And I think they're key to the West Side line. But it's not just Quakers that are involved in the West Side route. Okay, so what we're looking at, let's see, here is the cemetery at Friendship. Okay. So if you go out 52 from Portsmouth, you will come to Friendship on the right-hand side. This is really right by the entrance to the Shawnee State Forest on State Route 125. But near the intersection of State Route 125 and US 52 is the Friendship Cemetery. And it's located right next to the Friendship Methodist Church. In the cemetery there, you'll find this grave marker for William Veach, who was a private in Company I, the 140th Regiment of the Ohio Infantry during the Civil War. And if you look at his age, it's quite surprising that he actually was fighting in the Civil War at such an advanced age. But it is true that he did enlist and he did serve. William Veach was also a Scioto County commissioner, and he also served as the postmaster of the village of Friendship. And in the History of Scioto County, published in 1903 by Nelson Evans, in his biography, noted that William Veach sought to see justice done every man. And what he meant by that was that he was an abolitionist. Next to William Veach, you'll see this large marker for Dr. C.W. Veach, who was the first doctor of Nile Township, passed away in 1850. And there's good reason to believe that he, like his brother William, was also active on the Underground Railroad. So this next site that I want to go to, you can see that's called the Veach Simpson Cabin. On Worley's Run in Nile Township. Let's see. So let's zoom back out. So not far from where William Veach is buried there, if you go over here to what's called Worley's Run, to this site right here, and you'll find a log cabin. Now, a few years ago, when I first started working with the AmeriCorps program, we did an architectural survey of the Shawnee State Forest area, and we were told that there was a cabin out there that was known as the Grant Cabin, and has some sort of connection to former President Ulysses S. Grant. There also was some suggestions that Grant and his family might have worked on the Underground Railroad or abolitionists or what have you. It's rather complicated, but anyways, we were looking for what perhaps could have been a cabin that had some sort of connection to Ulysses S. Grant. But surprisingly, when Derek, who introduced me today, when he went down to the county courthouse to look at the property deeds, he found no mention of a grant. So let me stop sharing that. And here's the cabin on Worley's Run, a two-story cabin. It's a wonderful example of really early pioneer cabin structures in Scioto County in southern Ohio. Well, here are the property records, and you'll see that there's no grant, but there is a William Veach there. And so, to our surprise, we discovered that William Veach at one time owned this cabin. Whether or not it ever was an Underground Railroad station, we don't know. We don't have a way of proving it, but we do know that William Veach at one point in time did own this property, and so it is possible that this was an Underground Railroad site. But for those who know the Grant biography, the big surprise, I guess, was that we didn't find Grant, but we did find a Simpson, C.W. and B.F. Simpson. Possibly could be a distant relative of some sort with Hannah Simpson Grant, the mother of President Ulysses S. Grant. So there was perhaps some connection to the Grants, and so that local lore did bear some truth. But the big surprise was that that cabin at one time belonged to William Veach, who we know was an Underground Railroad conductor. So in his interview with Siebert, James Ashley told him that after they had delivered the slaves down there to basically Friendship and to Nile Township, that he went back over the river on the Ohio side to prospect around a little in Portsmouth to learn whether they suspected anybody. I met Joseph Riggs, and this incident occurred, which dazed me for a minute. He took a $20 gold piece out of his pocket and gave it to me and said, "James, you may need this." Now, in the longer story of James Ashley's biography, this would come to play an important role in his leaving Portsmouth. In 1851, Ashley, the year of the passage of the new federal fugitive slave law, which increased penalties for helping runaway slaves, James Ashley ran for the mayor of Portsmouth. It was a close race. There was a spoiler candidate, which cost Ashley the election, really. But after the election, Ashley became convinced that there had been sort of a whisper campaign, that word had gotten out that he was helping out with the Underground Railroad. And this was one reason Ashley gave as to why he left Portsmouth. He married a woman from Portsmouth and then moved to Toledo about 1852, thereabouts. And in Toledo, he switched parties. He had been a Democrat, but he switched parties and helped found the Republican Party up in Toledo. And then he got elected to Congress, first in 1858 and again 2 years later in 1860. So Ashley ended up representing, I'm sorry, I had a sound go off in the background there for a minute, representing Northeast Ohio. And we're going to now return to Portsmouth. And we're going to go to where James Ashley, at one point in time, had his office where he was editing a newspaper in Portsmouth called the Democratic Inquirer. So the building here that you're looking at, this was later in time, but the James A. Maxwell feed store prior to this was the location of the print shop and offices of the Democratic Inquirer paper. And you can see at another point in time, it was called Goltz and Molster. And this is the corner where it was located. It's the corner of Market and 2nd Street It's the southeast corner. And there's James Ashley, his full portrait, as done by Matthew Brady. For those who are Spielberg fans, if you saw Lincoln, James Ashley was depicted in that film by David Costabile. And there he is on the left with Daniel Day-Lewis playing Lincoln and David Strathairn playing William Seward. All right. Get back. One of the projects that we've worked on was a banner, historic banner project, street lamp banners. This is the one for James Ashley. This is part of a public history as well as a city rebranding initiative that was put together by Main Street Portsmouth, as well as a group called the Portsmouth Unity Project, and then, of course, the Scioto Historical Project. And here's a picture of the Democratic Inquirer. This is Ashley's paper that he founded. The motto you can see there is, "We may revere what is old and admire what is novel, but we should adhere only to what is just and true." And in the newspaper collection that Shawnee State received, we found the original volume of the Democratic Inquirer, and this will soon be digitized as part of that larger project, and ultimately made keyword searchable and available to the public. You can see here, the Inquirer is published every Tuesday by Jordan and Ashley. So this is the corner. It was called Micklethwaite Corner, primarily because of that wood building there on the left on the corner, but this is the location of the Democratic Inquirer newspaper office and print shop. Unfortunately, the structure is no longer there. In 1898, this corner was all torn down for the construction of the Washington Hotel, which was Portsmouth's premier hotel. And this building is still standing, and you can visit it today. Now, just across the street, just across Market Street, was the law office of Wells A. Hutchins. This is another congressman. Wells A. Hutchins was the congressman representing Portsmouth and Scioto County in 1865 when the U.S. Congress voted on the 13th Amendment. And it was Wells A. Hutchins, as we'll see, who provided one of the key votes for its passage. Hutchins's office was located here in what's known as the Massey Block. Unfortunately, this building also is no longer here. It burned in 1871. But here's Wells Hutchins. He famously crossed party lines. So again, he was a Democrat. He crossed party lines and cast one of the deciding votes in favor of the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery. So Hutchins is one of those few congressmen that would go down in history. Ashley said that they voluntarily walked off into their political death for voting as they did. And it's true, Hutchins would never get reelected again to the U.S. Congress. While we were doing our research into Wells Hutchins, we discovered that a portrait of him hangs in the domestic relations courtroom at the Scioto County Courthouse, and it is not marked. His name is not on it, and people had completely forgotten or the information had been lost. They didn't even know who that was depicted. But now we do. It's Wells Hutchins, who cast a deciding vote for the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery. Now, I should say that James Ashley, I should have mentioned this before, but James Ashley is most famous because he is the congressman who first introduced the 13th Amendment to Congress. He is considered the author of the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery. So not only does Portsmouth have the author of the 13th Amendment, but we also have, as one of our native sons, a congressman that provided a critical vote for the abolition of slavery. All right, going back now to my to the app. We'll take a look. Okay. Oh. So again, zooming back into Portsmouth down here. This is where James Ashley's office was, where the Washington is now. And then over here is where Wells Hutchins had his law office. And what we're going to do now is sort of go down 2nd Street to look at a couple different locations. The first one will be this one, and then the second one will be the location of John J. Minor's barbershop. So again, zooming back out. So the second, or the next place we're going to go is the story of Milton Kennedy and Joseph Ashton, grain merchants and conductors of the Underground Railroad on 2nd Street here in Portsmouth, Ohio. We were able to find a photograph, a portrait of Milton Kennedy. We do not have one for Joseph Ashton, but Kennedy was notorious for his outspoken support for abolition. He organized the Free Soil Party here in Scioto County. That was a sort of a precursor of the Republican Party that was abolitionist. He also went on to help found the Republican Party in Scioto County. So he and William Veach, another founder of the Republican Party, as well as his brother-in-law, Milton Kennedy's brother-in-law, Joseph Ashton, were original founding members of the Scioto County Republican Party. The Republican Party in Scioto County was divided between the abolitionist faction that was led by Milton Kennedy, and then a more conservative faction led by Peter Kinney, and a few other local elected officials that were formerly of the Whig Party. But Milton Kennedy and his brother Joseph Ashton ran a grain business. They sold corn primarily out of the Scioto Valley down into other towns down the Ohio River. A lot of their grain went to Cincinnati, where it was turned into whiskey and distilleries. But Kennedy also had canal boats that he owned, and it's possible that some of his conducting of runaways may have been along the Ohio Erie Canal. One of his cooperators, I believe, again, this is more like connecting dots than you can find this in the historical record, but there was George Davis, who owned a distillery on the west side of the Scioto River at what's called Union Mills, and it's believed that Davis, another one of the founders of the Republican Party here in Scioto County, that he was also an abolitionist and may have helped out with the Underground Railroad. But I want to return now to a short article that Siebert published in 1896 in the first volume of the American Historical Review, which is sort of the premier historical journal in the United States. And Siebert's article, again, was in the first volume, the 3rd issue. back in April of 1896. He described it as a preliminary study, but he referenced a research trip he had made to Portsmouth, Ohio in September 1894, and it's thanks to this field work, these interviews and so forth that Siebert did, that we can now piece together the key local players and the outlines of a secret network of whites and blacks operating independently at times, as well as together as allies on the Underground Railroad in Scioto County. And this is what Siebert wrote. He said, having grounds for believing that Portsmouth, Ohio was one of the initial stations of an Underground Railroad line of travel, I obtained by correspondence with Mr. Henry Hall, the mayor of the town, a letter stating that Milton Kennedy and his brother-in-law, Joseph Ashton, had aided fugitive slaves in that neighborhood, and urging that I visit Portsmouth in order to get fuller information. So here is the building that Kennedy originally constructed. We believe it was built in 1848 or thereabouts. It originally had a brick facade, but in 1871, a stone front was put on it, and it was renamed the Houston Stone Front. But originally, it was Kennedy's feed store. It was where Kennedy and Ashton had their grain business. But it was also the upper floors, for example, were set up. One was called the City Hall. It was not a government location, but rather it was a public hall for public programs like dances and dinners, live concerts, lectures, theatrical productions, and so forth. But here is, one of the few structures in Portsmouth that we know is connected to operators or conductors of the Underground Railroad. If you look at the top of the building today, the east side of the structure, if you can make it out, there's a ghost sign there that says feed store. And the building, I would point out, is also in this famous painting by Charlie Haskins, Welcome to P-Town, which also depicts the late Rich Moon there walking in front of the building. So this is what Siebert noted. He said, when I got to Portsmouth in September 1894, Mr. Kennedy was in the West, but I made the acquaintance of an intelligent colored man, a barber, J.J. Minor by name, himself an old-time agent of the road, who corroborated the report about Mr. Kennedy's connections with the underground work and gave a straightforward account of what he called the regular line up the Chillicothe Pike, what is the Scioto Trail, 7 miles to the houses of two colored men, Dan Lucas and Joseph Love. And thence they were taken to a settlement of colored people in Pebble Township in the north central part of Pike County. So here we see a key information, a corroboration of Kennedy's connections with the Underground Railroad, as well as additional information about African-American operators, conductors in Scioto County, Dan Lucas and Joseph Love. The 7 miles up the pike from Portsmouth, we know, is the location of Houston Hollow. And Houston Hollow was an African-American community early in the 19th century. And its history is believed to be connected to really a dark chapter in Portsmouth's history, where in 1831, the white residents of Portsmouth announced that they were going to enforce Ohio's black laws, basically which made it illegal to hire fugitive slaves. It required free blacks to register with the local county recorder, to put a $500 surety bond up, and that had to be signed by 2 white property owners. So Ohio did not make it easy for African Americans to move to Ohio. In fact, they created basically illegal immigrants with the black laws. And so Houston Hollow's origins, it's believed, is connected to that horrible event back in 1831 known as Black Friday, when about 80 African Americans in Portsmouth were expelled from the town. But Houston Hollow then became a stop on the Underground Railroad, a critical stop, and as we see, part of the black network of Underground Railroad operators working within Scioto County. Okay. I think I showed you where John J. Miner's barbershop was previously, so I'm not going to go back to the app, but I will go forward and tell the story of John J. Miner. So John J. Miner was born in 1828 in Albemarle County, Virginia. His name is John James Miner. He settled in Portsmouth probably in the mid-1830s, again, not long after that infamous Black Friday incident. Whether he was born free or a slave is unclear, but Miner grew up in Portsmouth. He was brought here by his parents. He married an African-American woman from Kentucky. He raised a family. He built a successful barbershop business, and he helped secure the charter of Portsmouth's Trinity Lodge No. 9 of free and accepted Masons. So Miner would serve as the lodge's first worshipful master beginning in 1871. U.S. Census records helped bring more of John J. Miner's life into focus. In June of 1860, John's wife, Martha, was 26 years old. John's profession, occupation, or trade is listed as barber, while Martha's was left blank. The couple had 2 children in their household, William, age 6, and Joseph, age 3. And both of these children had been born free in Ohio. The eldest, William, having been born in 1854, the year of John and Martha's marriage. The Miners rented their residence, sharing it with another African-American family headed by Ellen Jones, a 26-year-old single mother of 2. Their names were Mary, age 9, and Florence, age 6. Ellen Jones and her children were recorded as having all been born free in Ohio. John J. Miner reported that he owned $50 worth of personal property, while Ellen Jones had none. All 3 of the adults in the dwelling, according to the census enumerator, were able to read and write. So originally in the late 1850s, John J. Miner's barbershop was located on 2nd Street between Market and Court, in the heart of what is now known as the Boney Fiddle Historic District. And at the time of his death, at the time of his death, on the 14th of April, 1895, Miner's last barbershop was located on Gallia Street. Now, in the 1890s, when Portsmouth Central Business District shifted from the Boney Fiddle to the intersection of Chillicothe and Gallia, John J. Miner appears to have followed. So in 1894, when Siebert visited Portsmouth, he had the chance to interview John J. Miner. And it was really almost just kismet that happened. Okay. So we began looking for the location of John J. Miner's barbershop, hoping that maybe by chance it might still be standing. So we found in the Ohio State Directory, Williams Ohio State Directory, like a business directory from 1875 to 1876. The information, though, was gathered in 1871. But what you find for Portsmouth is that John J. Miner's barbershop was located at 104 West 2nd Street. Portsmouth's numbering system for its streets was changed around the turn of the century. And because of that, it becomes really quite difficult to figure out, based upon that 104 West 2nd Street address, where it was located. Because today, 104 West 2nd Street is not 104 2nd Street. Thankfully, the 1911 Sanborn insurance maps of Portsmouth, these are fire maps that were created by the Sanborn Company for insurance purposes. But thankfully, their map from 1911 includes the old number as well as the new number on their maps for addresses. And so we can see here that 104 West 2nd Street is actually 542 2nd Street today. .542. And if you jump on Google Street View and go to that address, 542, here's what you see. And this is the barbershop location of John J. Minor. I snapped this photo today on my way into my office. And you can see that it's recently been repainted, but very few people, I guess people today now know, but this is where Minor's barbershop was located. It's marked by one of the street lamp banners honoring him as part of that public history and rebranding initiative, Dream Here, Portsmouth, Ohio. And so here is the interview transcript created by Siebert from his interview with John J. Minor. Minor told Siebert that he would first hide runaways at his house on 5th Street. The African-American neighborhood in Portsmouth today is known as the North End. But at this point in time, the African-American neighborhood was more located down towards the Bony Fiddle, as you can see where Minor lived on 5th Street. But he would place them under the bed till nightfall, and then I took them up the Chillicothe Pike 7 miles and turned them over to another party, Dan Lucas and Joseph Love, colored. They took them over to PP and Pike County in a wagon. That is about 37 or 38 miles from here, where they were turned over to the Muncies and Barretts, also colored. The route I tell you about was the regular line. Of course, there were others I didn't know anything about. So here you see Minor acknowledging that there were other lines other than the one that he used. He was aware about, that he knew there must have been other ones, but he didn't have any personal information on. So it's thanks to this interview and the work of Siebert that we're able to recover this story about John J. Minor. I'm going to share my app one more time, the Scioto Historical app. And we'll make one last stop on this field trip and tour. All right, so zooming back out, looking at Portsmouth, we're going to travel over here to what is known as Green Lawn Cemetery, and to where it says War Memorial right here. This is known as Soldier's Circle. And I don't have a pin drop there for us, but this story is very much under development. So let me just zoom back out and return to my slideshow. So what we're looking at here is a photograph of Soldier's Circle. This part of the Green Lawn Cemetery was dedicated to the men who originally fought and died in the Civil War. It was later expanded to include other veterans, but it did originate for the first Sciotocanians to die in the Civil War. The statue there depicts a common soldier, a Union soldier, wearing the blue. At one point in time, I think in the early 70s, somebody would come in and paint him so he looked African American. I'd love to learn more about that story and all that, but he was returned to his original color, you could say, and restored and painted recently. But there in Soldier's Circle, you can find the grave of Joseph Love, and you'll recall that that's somebody that was mentioned by John J. Minor as one of his fellow cooperators or conductors. Joseph Love lived in Houston Hollow. But I want to read you the rest of the story, I guess you could say. Joseph Love enlisted on the 3rd of February, 1864, serving in the 27th Ohio Colored Infantry. This was one of the 27th Ohio was one of Ohio's 2 black regiments, made up primarily of free black men who answered Lincoln's call and volunteered. After his initial training in Ohio, Private Love and his regiment were taken by train to Washington, D.C., where they paraded before President Lincoln, marking the first time that the U.S. president had ever reviewed a regiment of uniformed black soldiers. As they passed, Lincoln reportedly tipped his signature stovepipe hat in appreciation and in respect. Eventually, Joseph Love's regiment would see combat in the Battle of the Crater in July of 1864, where they lost 12 soldiers killed in action and 2 more died later as a result of their wounds. 8 were missing in action, and a total of 64 were wounded in the battle. 6 of their comrades were taken prisoner by the Confederates, which surely signaled their doom. During the battle, Love's unit also lost 3 white officers killed, 2 wounded, and 1 taken prisoner. The high point of his service no doubt came in February of 1865, when after helping take Fort Fisher, the 27th Ohio Colored Infantry participated in the liberation of Wilmington, North Carolina, when Union troops occupied this important Atlantic port and freed the city's slave population. According to one account, the black men of the 27th, Joseph Love included, when they marched into the city, they were singing John Brown's Body, the classic abolitionist song. Following his honorable discharge on the 21st of September, 1865, with 1 year, 7 months, and 18 days of service, Joseph Love returned to Scioto County. He ultimately settled in Portsmouth, and with his wife, who also was named Martha, he raised a son and a daughter while making a living as a teamster and serving as a volunteer fireman. So, no discussion of Soldier's Circle or African American service in the Civil War is complete without the story of Sergeant George W. Farley, who grew up within the bounds of Portsmouth, where he helped his father, Jesse Farley, when he was engaged in assisting runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad. Farley, at the age of 17, enlisted in the 44th Regiment of the United States Colored Troops, which in contrast to Love's unit, was raised largely in the southern states of Tennessee and Georgia and was made up of mostly former slaves. Farley served 1 year, from February 1865 to February 1866, and he is best known as Portsmouth's last surviving Union veteran of the Civil War, having died at the age of 90 on March 25th, 1940. His regiment's most dramatic and deadly service occurred before Farley enlisted, and thus George Farley was spared the worst of the fighting and the abuse and murder that many of his unit soldiers had experienced when captured by Confederates. Farley, like his brother in arms, Joseph Love, returned to Portsmouth and lived the life of a model citizen. He and his wife, Mary, raised a large family, 4 children. Mr. Farley is said to have worked on steamboats as well as a wheelwright in a local factory. In his later years, as his fellow veterans passed from the scene, it was Sergeant Farley who became the living memorial to those heroic men who had defeated the Confederacy, saved the Union, and freed the slaves. In 1941, when it came time to name the new federally funded public housing project, the Portsmouth Metropolitan Housing Authority held an essay contest among the students of the segregated Washington School. The winning essay nominating George Farley Square was written by Odessa Barrett, an 8th grade pupil. And it was in her essay from family members that we learned that George Farley had assisted with runaway slaves, helping his father back in his childhood. Here's the plaque at George Farley Square. Always read the plaque is what I say. George W. Farley Square, built by the Portsmouth Metropolitan Housing Authority with the assistance of the United States Housing Authority, Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States of America, architects DeVos and Donaldson, contractor C.A. Yeager and Company, 1941. So, some closing thoughts from Professor David W. Blight, who I mentioned earlier. He's written extensively on the Underground Railroad. He's also written that recent biography of Frederick Douglass. But in his essay, Why the Underground Railroad and Why Now? A Long View, he says this: determining exactly what constitutes reliable evidence about Underground Railroad sites and stories is an important endeavor. Even more important is understanding why American society, with its long history of racial conflict, needs this story, and whether feel-good narratives of escape and cooperation alone meet the need, or serious confrontations with the realities and legacies of slavery are still required in a land founded on the ideas of consent, liberty, and equality. All right. Okay, I guess I'll end the presentation there, and I'm happy to field questions. Maybe there's some questions that were coming in while I was doing the presentation. I think Derek's going to help me with that.
All right. So yeah, we do have a few questions, Drew.
I think you're on mute there, Derek.
Can you hear me now? Okay, hold on. All right, can you hear me now?
Sure can.
Okay, great. All right, so yeah, we do have a few questions. Apparently my headphones weren't working. But from Andre, he asked the question, is PP in reference to PP Creek in Piketon?
Yes. PP Creek that's right. Outside Piketon on the west side of the Scioto River. There's a creek called PP Creek. There's a prairie, PP Prairie, but there was a community, an African-American community, a free black community known as the PP Settlement. And that was the location that Joseph Love and Dan Lucas would take slaves, fugitive slaves to.
Okay. From Edith, was there any truth in quilts hanging out to show that they were part of the Underground Railroad for slaves?
My understanding is that is true. There was some of the symbols used in quilts. There is truth to that. I don't know how common it was, but that's based in truth.
Okay. From Rita, in the ad for the escaped female slave, I assume in the beginning, what did they refer to her as? Was it a tolerant black or?
Tolerable, I think was the term, which I'm not certain what that means. I think it was probably a racist reference to a lighter skin color, but I'm not certain of that.
Okay, from Diana. Is there a record of the 4 men's names that were executed in the Greenup Revolt?
Well, I wish there were. I have looked for any kind of court records in Greenup County as well as in Frankfort. And the people that I've consulted in Frankfort, and so, well, the people in Greenup said, we don't have records like that, but if they exist, they'll be in Frankfort. I got in touch with the archivist in Frankfort, and they were unable to find any court records from that time period for Greenup County. So it does appear, though, that there was a trial, so there was a legal proceeding, but it's really only the reporting of Julius Bingham that we have that allows us to know anything about this. It's unclear how many slaves may have gotten away. The original reporting, it seemed like there were 8 that were caught. And why all 8 were not put on trial for the murder is not clear either. So there's a lot of mystery still. I'd love to find additional records that would provide additional light on that story, particularly their names. It would be fabulous. But another example of how frustrating the research can be. You just can't find this information. It's been lost to history.
Okay. Ryan asks, have you discovered any evidence to support the old stories that iron furnace owners, known to have been abolitionists by and large, assisted with the Underground Railroad, namely Daniel Young or Orrin Gould?
Orrin Gould, yes. I've seen some reference to him as being an abolitionist. Whether there's a record of him specifically helping out on the Underground Railroad, I can't say right now, but Gould is definitely a Scioto County, and that was an abolitionist and may have had a role in that. I don't know about Daniel Young. I do know that I was going to say Joseph Campbell. It doesn't sound right, but John Campbell, who owned many of the furnaces over in Lawrence County, who founded Ironton. Campbell was a major abolitionist, and he worked with African Americans in a settlement called Poke Patch, which is just over the border in Gallia County. But there was a line that ran from Ironton, basically along the railroad that Campbell built up into where all the furnaces are. And that's the route that the slaves took, often in wagons that belonged to Campbell. But they went to different, like Olive Furnace, I believe, was a Underground Railroad site as well. So yeah, they're on the Ohio side. These iron furnaces also exist on the Kentucky side of the river, over in Greenup County. And on the Kentucky side, some of the furnace owners employed slaves. Well, I wouldn't say employed slaves. They used slaves that they had purchased. So there were slaves working in the iron furnaces on the Kentucky side. And so on the Ohio side, interestingly, some of the owners of the furnaces were abolitionists and were, helped out with the Underground Railroad.
So Drew, Gary Hairston asks, where and what is the location of the George W. Farley plaque?
The plaque is located in Farley Square. I'd have to actually walk and show them exactly where it is, but it's out. I thought it was maybe an office for might have been the property manager's office. I don't know. It is installed on a wall, on an exterior wall of the Farley Square apartments.
Okay, that's what I had thought too. I thought we had actually photographed it there.
Yep.
Regina asks, is there evidence that Camp Molly Lowman, GS Camp, is connected to the UGR, the Underground Railroad? I was once shown a hidden room there. It's on Bear Creek Road.
This is a story I don't know about, so I would like to learn more and look into it. So I don't know about the history behind the Camp Molly Lawman, but it's possible that would have been along the west side line, the one running up the Ohio Erie Canal. So it could have been part of the network that we were talking about with James Ashley and William Veach.
Okay. Linda Donaldson asks, is it true slaves were used to build the Washington Hotel in Portsmouth?
Well, chronologically, it's impossible that slaves were used to build the Washington Hotel, because it was built in 1898. So unless there was a different hotel that Linda's referencing, perhaps it was another hotel. I don't know. It's theoretically possible that the slaves were quote unquote hired out, that the slaves may have resided in Kentucky and were owned by owners in Kentucky, and that they were hired out and being paid for their labor. Now the owner was the one who received the pay, but it's possible. And the reason why I say it's possible is because I have seen other evidence of, for example, a African American from Greenup whose master was a saddler. He taught the slave the skills of being a saddler, and he said, "Look, if you want, you can go work in Portsmouth on your free time, and any money you make as a saddler, you can put towards your freedom." And so this guy actually bought his freedom from making money in Portsmouth, making saddles, and he made enough to buy his own freedom and then his wife and his child's freedom. So technically you could say that was a slave working in Portsmouth. So I would say that there probably were slaves working in Portsmouth. They were probably hired out by their owners, in Greenup County.
Okay. Amy Barnhart asks, was the Ohio River in Scioto County region a good place to cross from Kentucky into Ohio?
Well, I guess maybe I should more reemphasize that Portsmouth was not necessarily friendly to African Americans. And I say that, knowing the story of Black Friday, that, there was a strong majority that wanted to discourage African American settlement in Portsmouth, sort of anti-immigrant, racist anti-immigrant sentiment. There's another runaway slave story I know. His name was Joe Logan. He ended up in West Union, Adams County, the county just west of Scioto. And in his account of his escape from slavery, he came up from North Carolina and crossed the river, probably around where Ashland is today. And he was going to Adams County because his wife was in Adams County. She had been.
I got you back, Drew.
She had been freed and taken to Adams County. And so he ran away from North Carolina. He was owned by a different owner. He ran away to meet up with his wife and kids. And he said that when he got to just outside Portsmouth, on the east side, coming in probably on what would be 52 today, he got accosted by a couple guys that were like, "Hey, what are you doing?" He looked suspicious. He looked like a runaway slave. And according to Joe Logan, he beat those guys up and escaped. And he said, "I decided to go around Portsmouth." So Portsmouth was not a real. There were not a lot of slaves that went through Portsmouth. There were definitely entry points in Ohio where there was a lot greater traffic. I would say it may be that Ironton had more traffic than Portsmouth. And I would also say that Ripley, downriver from us in Brown County, down by Maysville, that's the Kentucky side, but Ripley was a major crossing. And then if you go down to Cincinnati, between Covington and Cincinnati, Covington on the Kentucky side and Cincinnati, you have another major, probably some 4,000 slaves probably went through Cincinnati, with Levi Coffin being the primary conductor there, or sometimes Levi Coffin is described as the president of the Underground Railroad.
This is a question from Patrick. Was the operation of the railroad so sophisticated as to keep alternate routes confidential from other operatives in order to prevent general collapse?
Good question. Some cities had much more organized operations. So there were what were called vigilance committees in some cities. I've not found any written evidence of a vigilance committee here in Portsmouth, either in the black community or the white community, but that doesn't mean there wasn't some sort of informal, organized, network going on. It's telling that J.J. Minor, knew that there were other routes. He knew there were other operators and conductors and so forth, but he wasn't privy to that information. So I think that might be a function, not by design, of compartmentalized information, but rather that the network was more informal, and that the African American community and their operators, they would occasionally work with whites, but they seem to also be kind of running their own operation, like J.J. Minor's operation. So I don't know. It would be fantastic if we had more records, but the thing to remember is that this activity was illegal. It was opposed by the majority of the population. I think that today we like to think that everybody in the North was anti-slavery, anti-racist, but that was not the case at all. And in some communities, you had really strong white majorities that were anti-abolition. And that was the case, I would suggest, down along the border counties in particular, like Scioto County, had a pro-slavery or anti-abolitionist majority.
Okay, we're going to do a few more questions here. We're already over by about 8 minutes. I encourage all of you, after the event, we'll break back out into that lounge area, and you guys can kind of ask Drew some questions at a table. He can pop around, or you can talk amongst yourselves. So let's do a couple more questions.
All right.
This comes from Marlita Perkins, who's a historian from the Eastern Kentucky Research and Publishing. Are you aware that the 4 executed in Greenup were not the only ones? A woman was also executed on May 25th, 1830. She was publicly hanged. She also has the names of those executed. So maybe that's a good connection. Wow.
I would love to learn more about that. So I don't know if Derek, you can put my email there for folks, but it's afeight@shawnee.edu, afeight@shawnee.edu. That sounds really promising, and I would love to hear more about that.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's do a couple more. What is the relationship of Julius Bingham to Hiram Bingham? If so, did Hiram play a role on the Underground Railroad?
That's Hiram Bingham.
Hiram, sorry.
I know a little bit about Hiram Bingham. I believe he was a congressman from Ohio, known as an abolitionist, and I believe. I don't know that there's a relation between the two. I'm still working on my research into Julius Bingham, so I don't know for sure if there's a connection between the two.
Okay, Maureen Cadogan has a question and a statement. She said the Ferguson family are direct descendants of George Farley. Lorna Ferguson is his great-great-granddaughter, and she lives in Zanesville, just for your information. But she also asks, do you have any history on the nursing homes down by the flood wall? I'd assume she means the old hotels down there.
Well, she may be talking about there was like a old woman's home or something like that used to be located. I'm not sure exactly what Maureen might be referring to. So Maureen, let's talk about that some other day. Always happy to chat with you. So I look forward to learning about this. So tell me, at some other time. Thanks.
Okay. Lisa Carver asked if the presentation will be available for others to watch later. I just posted that in the chat. It will be available on YouTube as well as the Cricker Innovation Hub's Facebook page. If you just want to go give us a like and follow, you can see all of our events on our YouTube channel from there.
Excellent.
Deborah Franklin asks, hopefully he will tell us what the word Scioto means. Some people just want that cleared up.
Well, there's some debate over that, but it's comes from a Native American word that the debate is basically, does it mean deer, like river of deer? Some people have translated it as like hairy, like the deer hair, a river with deer hair. So I kind of come down on the side that Scioto refers to deer. I guess another one is that it may mean long legs, which is a really different translation, and that may be a reference to the long tributaries that flow into the Scioto River. Yeah.
Okay. Is there any record of operatives from Portsmouth being caught and prosecuted in Kentucky?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Let's do one more, and then we'll go out to the lounge. Let's find a good one. What was the final destination of escaped slaves using these different pipelines? Where were they attempting to reach?
Ultimately, Canada. From Portsmouth, if you went up the lines out of Portsmouth, I think they went through Ross County, probably through Frankfort, maybe over into Highland County, but ultimately to Columbus. And then for Columbus, it looks like the line, from what I've read, at least one of the lines, jagged eastward to there was an African-American settlement east of Columbus. And then there's another town, I think it's where the college is located. But anyways, ultimately, the road from Portsmouth ended up going through Oberlin. And Oberlin, is a hotbed of abolitionists. Oberlin College is located there, the first college to admit women and African Americans. And then from Oberlin, they would have headed ultimately to the shores of Lake Erie, and then into Canada, through various different directions and means. Okay.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. Feel free to stick around at our lounge for a while afterward, but it's been a pleasure, and thank you for coming to the event.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.